She said, "You're not my husband. You don't get a say in where I go or who I'm with." I smiled. "You're right." Until she returned and found all her suitcases and favorite clothes scattered outside, I walked into the bedroom and saw her surrounded by a pile of dresses, shoes, and carefully folded accessories. I cleared my throat and asked, trying to keep my voice calm, "Hey, where are you planning to go tonight? And, who's coming with you?" She turned slowly, a sly smile on her lips, eyes sparkling with defiance, and said, "You're not my husband. You don't get a say in where I go or who I'm with." I froze. My heart sank, not because of her words, but because of the way she said them, so proud, so untouchable. Frustration bubbled up, and I couldn't help the sharp edge in my voice. "Seriously, I'm just asking because I care. I'm not trying to control you." She only shrugged, brushing past me to continue choosing her outfit, humming happily. I forced a small smile, stepping out of the room, but inside I was already planning a surprise she would never see coming when she walked out the door. I had been dating her for almost 2 years. From the beginning, she had always been fiercely independent, proud, confident, and sometimes infuriatingly stubborn. We had shared countless weekends together, late-night talks, and even small trips, but there was always this invisible line she drew between us. She valued her freedom, her space, and she never hesitated to remind me that technically I wasn't her husband. Our apartment often reflected this dynamic. While I tried to make our space feel cozy, organized, and shared, she had her corner of the closet, her meticulously arranged accessories, and a sense of order that revolved entirely around her. Her favorite perfumes, shoes, and handbags were displayed like treasures in her personal kingdom. It wasn't just about material things. It was about control over her own life. And the message was always clear. I was welcome. But I didn't have authority. Over the months, subtle incidents had begun to pile up. She would plan nights out with friends or attend events without telling me in advance. When I asked where she was going or who she would be with, she would sometimes brush me off, sometimes joke, and occasionally firmly assert that I had no say. Each time it stung, but I reminded myself she was her own person and I loved her independence. Still, the pattern was undeniable. I wanted to be involved in her life without crossing boundaries. I wanted to share experiences, make small decisions together, and simply be considered in her plans. Yet every time I tried, there was resistance. A simple question about an outing could turn into a tense exchange about autonomy, freedom, and control. The day before the incident, she had spent hours browsing online, selecting dresses and accessories, planning what seemed like a big night out. She was excited, humming tunes as she scrolled through her phone, and I asked casually if she needed help carrying anything or if she wanted company. She smiled, waved me off, and reminded me once again I wasn't her husband. I didn't get a say. Despite the frequent reminders, there was an unspoken understanding between us. She liked her freedom, and I respected it, mostly, but deep down, a small seed of frustration had been growing inside me. Each declaration of independence, each dismissal of my curiosity or concern, felt like a tiny rejection. I wasn't controlling. I just wanted to be seen, considered, included. That morning the stage was set. She had laid out her outfits, carefully matched shoes and accessories on the bed. The sunlight streaming through the window highlighted the colors and textures of each item. I watched from the doorway, my mind calculating, remembering all the times I had asked and been ignored, all the moments she had asserted her boundaries with a sharp edge. I wanted to speak, to ask about her plans, but I knew this would be the moment when the tension would finally boil over. As I stepped closer, preparing to ask a simple question about where she was going, I felt a familiar mix of frustration, anticipation, and restrained anger. Every little action, the way she arranged her dresses, the casual flip of her hair, the confident smile, reminded me that she didn't see me as someone with a say in her decisions. And that, in itself, was the spark for what was about to unfold. I stepped closer, trying to make sense of what was happening. She had pulled out almost every dress from her closet, laying them across the bed as if preparing for some grand fashion show. Shoes, handbags, accessories, it was all carefully arranged, each item seemingly chosen with meticulous care. I hesitated for a moment before speaking, my voice tight with frustration. "Where are you going? Who's coming with you?" I asked again, trying to keep it calm but failing. My heart was racing. I just wanted to know, was she safe? Was she thinking about me at all? She turned sharply, a playful but cutting smile on her face. "You're not my husband!" "You don't get a say in where I go or who I'm with," she said, her tone firm but light, almost teasing. I felt a jolt of anger, mixed with disbelief. "Seriously?" "I'm just asking because I care. I'm not trying to control you," I snapped, my fists clenching at my sides. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't back down. "I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions." "You're overstepping." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but my mind was already racing. This wasn't the first time she'd drawn this line, asserting her independence like it was a shield against me. Every time I tried to talk, she brushed me off. Every time I asked a simple question about our plans, she reminded me that I wasn't her husband, that I had no say. "Look, it's not about control," I said, my voice lower now, tinged with exasperation. "It's about consideration. If you're going out, I'd like to know." "I don't want to be left in the dark," she laughed lightly, flipping through a rack of dresses as if my words didn't matter. "You're right. You don't get a say. That's the whole point." I clenched my jaw, forcing a calm smile, stepping back. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. Frustration, irritation, and a simmering sense of injustice collided in my chest. I wanted to argue, to make her understand that her words hurt, but I knew that would only turn into another shouting match. Instead, I let her continue. She hummed softly, picking up scarves, debating between a red dress and a black one, trying on shoes and then discarding them. Each time I opened my mouth to ask a practical question, "Do you need a ride?" Or "When will you be back?" she cut me off, a smile playing on her lips. "You're not my husband. Stop asking." It was infuriating, humiliating even, to be treated like an outsider in what should have been a shared moment of preparation. My mind wandered to all the times she'd done similar things, leaving me out of plans, not telling me where she was going, flaunting her independence as if it were a weapon. The more I watched her, the clearer it became. I couldn't confront her now without exploding. I had to think. I had to plan. I had to make her understand in a way she couldn't ignore that actions had consequences, even if we weren't married. By the time she had finished choosing her outfit and carefully arranging her bags, I had a calm mask over my face, but my mind was sharp, precise, already calculating my next move. The anger hadn't gone. It had just transformed into something quieter, but far more effective. She turned to me one last time, a triumphant smile on her lips. "I'm all set. You're not my husband, remember? Don't worry your head about where I'm going." I nodded, calm and collected. "Got it," I said, voice soft, almost indifferent. But as she left the room, carrying her carefully packed bags and humming a cheerful tune, I knew that when she returned, she wouldn't recognize the room or what she had left behind. She finally left the bedroom humming softly, swinging her bag over her shoulder. I waited a few minutes, letting her excitement settle and letting her believe everything was normal. Then I stepped into the room. The dresses, shoes, and carefully folded accessories stared back at me like little flags of defiance. I started with the dresses, pulling each one off the bed and hanging them on hangers, moving them outside to the small balcony. The wind caught the lighter fabrics, making them flutter wildly like flags announcing my silent protest. Shoes followed one by one, lined neatly on the balcony floor, or in some cases, scattered just enough to make a mess that looked accidental but wasn't. Her favorite handbag, the one she used for almost every outing, I placed near the door, open and slightly askew, so it looked as if someone had rummaged through it. It took time, careful, deliberate time. Every move was precise, almost surgical. I didn't shout or slam doors. I didn't need to. The silence itself was louder than any argument could ever be. Every carefully placed item outside was a reminder. Actions have consequences. Respect has limits, even in love. By the time I finished, the room looked empty, except for her neatly folded scarves and some small trinkets I left untouched. Her treasures, yes, but not her statements of control. I stepped back, surveying my work. It wasn't chaotic exactly. It was intentional, unmistakable, and just a little humiliating for someone who had prided herself on having complete control over her space. And then I waited. When she returned, her keys jingling in the lock, she stopped cold. Her eyes widened as she stepped inside. Dresses danced in the wind on the balcony. Shoes lay scattered across the floor like abandoned soldiers, and her bag was tipped over in a way that made it clear someone had been there. "What? What happened?" she whispered, disbelief etched across her face. I leaned casually against the wall, my voice calm, almost gentle. "I thought you might like a little fresh air for your wardrobe," I said softly. "You did tell me I wasn't your husband, that I didn't get a say, so I didn't interfere. I just relocated your things." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked around, trying to process the scene. Her perfectly organized room, her carefully arranged outfits all outside, exposed to the elements, shifting slightly in the breeze. The shock on her face was palpable, part confusion, part outrage, and a tiny spark of awe at how precise I had been. I can't believe you," she finally managed, her voice trembling between anger and incredulity. I didn't reply immediately. I simply watched her, calm and steady, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "You're right," I finally said, echoing her words from earlier. "I'm not your husband. But that doesn't mean I don't deserve some consideration." Respect has to go both ways, even before vows are exchanged. She sank onto the edge of the bed, eyes wide, speechless. I could see the realization slowly forming. My actions were not about control, not about punishment, but about boundaries. About the simple understanding that in any relationship, mutual respect was non-negotiable, and as I quietly closed the door behind me, leaving her to deal with the sight of her wardrobe scattered and exposed to the open air, I knew one thing for certain. She would never underestimate the consequences of dismissing me again. The message had been sent, clear, deliberate, and unforgettable. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dresses fluttering in the wind, the shoes scattered across the floor and her bag lying open. For a long moment there was silence, just the soft rustle of fabric and the occasional creak of the balcony railing. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling slightly between anger and disbelief. I can't believe you did this. You weren't supposed to touch anything. You're not my husband." I remained calm, leaning against the wall, arms crossed but relaxed. "I know," I said softly. "You made that very clear. And I didn't try to stop you or control you, but I needed you to understand something. Even in a relationship where I'm not your husband, respect and consideration still matter." She opened her mouth, searching for words, but none came. The reality of the situation was sinking in. My actions weren't meant to punish her in a traditional sense, nor were they out of anger. They were deliberate, precise, and quiet, a message that boundaries exist whether or not there's a ring on a finger. "I didn't touch your trinkets," I continued. "I left some things untouched, because I know some of them are yours, your personal treasures. But the rest, well, it seemed like the perfect time for a little lesson in consideration." Her expression softened slightly, though her pride remained intact. "So, this is about boundaries?" she asked, almost whispering. "Yes," I said. "Boundaries, respect, and mutual consideration. If we're going to be together, whether now or in the future, we have to understand that actions have consequences. Ignoring someone's concerns, even if they're not your husband, still affects the relationship." She took a deep breath, finally standing and walking to the balcony to retrieve her dresses. The wind caught them as she gathered them, but this time her movements were quieter, more reflective. There was no shouting, no accusations, just the realization that I had made my point without destroying anything irreversibly, and that the relationship needed a new understanding. We didn't argue again that day. Instead, we moved carefully around each other, both aware of the tension, but also of the lesson that had been delivered. I felt a strange sense of relief, not triumph, not victory, but relief that the boundaries had been established clearly, calmly and irrevocably. By the evening, we were able to talk quietly, acknowledging each other's feelings. She admitted reluctantly that I had a point. I acknowledged that I had let my frustrations simmer too long before taking action. In the end, the room was restored, the dresses rehung, and the shoes lined up neatly again. But the lesson lingered in both our minds. The day ended not with anger or resentment, but with understanding, a quiet, uncomfortable, yet necessary growth in our relationship. Respect isn't automatic, I realized, and neither is consideration. Both must be actively maintained, especially when someone chooses independence over formal commitment. Looking back, I realized that relationships, whether casual, long-term, or somewhere in between, require more than love or attraction. They require mutual respect, understanding, and consideration, even before a ring is involved. Boundaries aren't just rules. They're the invisible lines that protect both people's dignity and autonomy. I acted the way I did not out of malice or revenge, but because repeated dismissals and lack of consideration can quietly erode trust and respect. I wanted her to understand that independence is admirable, but ignoring your partner's concerns or feelings can have consequences. Even if the relationship isn't formalized by marriage, after that day our dynamic changed. Conversations became more honest, questions less ignored, and decisions a little more collaborative. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step toward recognizing that respect goes both ways, no matter what title or label your relationship carries. If you were in my shoes, would you have done the same? Or would you have swallowed your frustration and stayed silent, hoping your partner would eventually consider your feelings? Sometimes it's not about control. It's about establishing boundaries and teaching respect, even in small, calculated ways. What would you have done differently?